Welcome to the Creative Ticket podcast, brought to you by Pacific Video. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast has been originally created, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today. I am Geraldo Rodriguez, Sydney-based actor, writer, and director, and on this podcast I'll talk to artists from all over the world about their craft, their careers, inspirations, and insights. If you are an arts fanatic like myself, make sure to follow and subscribe so you won't miss out on new episodes. Nicholas Hiatt is an Australian actor based in Sydney. He has been working as an actor for the last 15 years, both in Australia and in the US. He's also one of the recipients of the 2016 Mike Walsh Fellowship. Welcome, Nick. It's
Hello.
Such an honor to have you on the show.
The honour is all mine.
I'll start with a question. How did it all begin? So you've had such a remarkable career so far. You've worked in Australia, you've worked in the US, you've worked on screen, stage, you've been a coach. I'm curious to know how it all started.
Before I tell you how it all started, I want to say how much I appreciate you using the word remarkable to describe my career, because it's not something I necessarily would have picked straight away. But I think this is one of the lovely things about you doing a podcast like this, is that it's certainly getting me to look and reflect on my career in a slightly different light, because I think we can get very focused as creatives on like, oh, the next thing, I need to be doing this thing, I need to be this, why am I not the lead in a HBO pilot, when actually all the stuff you do is an accumulation of all your experiences creatively, artistically. So even though there's times where maybe it hasn't been as lucrative, it's been artistically rewarding. And yeah, I just say I appreciate that, because I wasn't necessarily seeing it that way, but now I'm thinking, you know what, I've done some stuff, and maybe I've got something to share. So as how it all started, I decided to become a performing artist at the age of 21, but we'd sort of been leading to that for a long time. So it was a gradual thing, and maybe similar thing for you, similar thing for probably a lot of people who have already been a guest on your podcast, is that it started from a very young age. A lot of those bios often have that line, they've loved performing arts from a young age. And I was certainly one of those kids who loved performing arts from a young age. Something that was clocked on to early from some of my teachers, even when I was in primary school, that I maybe had a knack for getting up on stage and learning lines. I used to play violin, and I learned the Suzuki method, which I don't know if you know the Suzuki method of violin, but you learn everything by ear early on. So you don't learn to read music until quite a bit later in your training. And that has pros and cons, but for me, it maybe helped sort of ingrain this kind of rote learning thing of listening and picking things up. And when I went into high school, I then became that kid that lived for the school play. I was in year 8 and we did a production of Treasure Island, and I played Ben Gunn, the crazy guy who's left on the island. And up until that point, all my teachers kind of thought I was a bit of a quiet, reserved kid. And then they saw me on stage and they were all a bit shocked and surprised. And I kind of went, oh, I'm onto something here. And after that, I lived for the school play. Everything I could do, I would do just about every production that I could. And unusually there were a couple of years where I did more than one production, because usually you had a junior play, maybe a senior play. And in my school, we had a thing called the chapel play, because we had this beautiful chapel at... did you ever pass Guildford Grammar School? From Midland to the city. You might know it if you saw it, because I know you spent some time.
Yeah, probably, yes.
Yeah, it's this beautiful old chapel, and the chaplain at the time would put on a play in the space. And so there was one year I did the senior play and the chapel play. You know, I didn't care as much about my academic work, and I did once find like my old school reports and the headmaster writing a thing saying, Nicholas has Clearly done very well in the school production, but perhaps he can focus more on his academic pursuits. And this, I found this after I graduated from NIDA, and I went, well, I showed you. So I finish high school, I get out there, I start getting into the sort of amateur theatre scene in Perth. And I also did a stint at Whopper, so the 1-year course. They used to have a Cert 2 in musical theatre at Whopper, which ran for a year, and it was part-time. I think they have something similar still, but it's evolved a bit or changed. And I loved that. And I sort of felt like, oh, this is where I want to be, doing this kind of stuff. Come 2009, I was doing 2 shows. I did a sort of pro-amateur production of Les Mis. I'd been working really hard on my singing and received some nice feedback from my peers and friends and family. And I sort of went, look, I think I actually really want to do this. So if I'm going to be at the bottom rung of the ladder creatively, and all my other professional pursuits at that time were creative as well. So I thought, if I'm going to be at the bottom of the ladder, what do I want to be moving towards this whole time? And I realized it was performing and it was acting. So at the end of that year, I auditioned for NIDA for the first time. I got shortlisted by the skin of my teeth. Didn't get in, but that's okay. And I got a job on a cruise ship as a singer. So that was my first professional job. So I left Perth, and that was a big thing for me because up until that point, I sort of always imagined myself as someone who would live and die and breed in Perth. Like Perth would be my forever home. And to take that leap into the unknown to say, actually, I think I will have to leave Perth was a big deal. But I'm kind of glad I did. And not to say I don't love Perth, because it's still a big part of my psyche, myself. You know, my heart's in Perth, my family's there. But yeah, when I was 21, that's when I made the decision to actually give it a red hot go. And so I just went for everything I could. And so I ended up on the cruise ship. And then when I came back, I auditioned for NIDA. And on my second try, I got in. And then I met you.
Amazing. And Nick, what was it that at such a young age you felt like that's what you wanted? Because I find that for some people, the like drama, like when you start doing theater, when you start doing drama classes, you find friends that are sort of a little bit different than the friends that you had at school, or you find an environment that fosters some sort of relationship that is also cherished, is also important when you're a teenager. Was that some sort of influence, or was it just like the magic of performing, the magic of turning into a character, or being on stage and having that sort of communion with the audience? Can you tell what was it?
Oh, it was all of the above, I think, for sure. Yeah, what you're talking about, the communion with the audience and getting to wear the mask of another character and show another side of yourself that you didn't get to normally, that was a huge part of it. The other part of it was that it was something that I was good at least while I was at school. Like it was sort of clocked onto by other students like, oh, Nick Hiatt's actually pretty good at this acting drama thing. And my school was a very sport-oriented school, as most schools are in Australia. So we had singing, we had music, we had choir. I got to go to this school on a music scholarship. So the arts were part of the school. But really, at the end of the day, it was the swim team or the football team or the rugby team that was the most important thing. And drama was kind of there to help the well-rounded students become more well-rounded. But in my case, it was the one place where I seemed to kind of stand out. So by the time I got to year 12, I was a co-drama captain with a friend of mine, and we would make announcements about the shows at school assembly, and we just do the silliest things. I can't quite remember exactly what we did, but we'd sort of get up there and put on a little act and be a sketch or something, and we'd dance around in front of the whole school. And that was a big deal for me as a 17-year-old to find the courage to do that and be like, yeah, this is me, this is what I do. And then to have sort of some of the other students come up to me and kind of be like, yeah, that was all right. Like, good stuff, man. Like, that was very validating. When
That's a big thing. That's a big thing when you're 17. That's all right. That's all right.
Exactly.
All right.
Especially when you're like a short little guy who is pretty rubbish at kicking a football. So I was kind of known as this kid who drew dragons in the back of his maths book and did drama. And that was me. So yeah, all of the above.
And I'll ask you my next question, which is, you went to APA, you went to NIDA, and you did many other acting courses and workshops all throughout your career. And do you find that a drama school or a drama course or workshops are still important, or were important for you, in the sense that you could have had lots of professional experiences, or you learn while you have professional experiences? What is the importance of a drama school for you, and how was it like for you?
I think it was definitely the right thing for me, because that was my window into the industry. And before NIDA, the idea of getting on TV and film and maybe even like a main stage theatre show, the chasm, it seems such a chasm to kind of reach over to that point and imagine that being possible. So drama school was very much the dream for a long time for me, because initially I thought I wanted to go to drama school just to say I went to drama school, because I thought, well, this is something I'm sort of good at. I like the people I meet. I'll have fun, and I'll be able to say I've done that. And I actually spent the first time when I finished high school, I auditioned for the musical theatre course at WAPA straight away. And they said to me, look, we think you're nice, but you're not ready for us. So work on your voice and come back next year. And I went, okay. And so I did that. And then I got into the Cert 2 musical theatre course, the part-time one. So I did that when I was 19, took a break for a year, finished my other degree. And then I came back and I gave musical theatre a red hot go. And I got very close. And then they realised I wasn't a very good dancer. Well, look, they kind of knew, but it was clear that the potential I had as a dancer wasn't what they were after. And thank goodness they made that decision, because I don't think I would have ended up at NIDA. But part of the reason I went for NIDA in the end is I sat down and I asked myself, okay, well, why did I really want to go to drama school? What is it I really want to do? I sort of fell into musical theatre because I liked acting. Well, let's go back to acting, just that craft. And musical theatre is always there. It's an offshoot of that. And it ended up being that NIDA was my pathway. And you might, look, because you've worked with me when I've been teaching, and you might have heard me say to students that, like, you don't know what your pathway is. There's no set pathway. NIDA can be a great pathway to get you out into the industry and get you noticed, because it has all those wonderful alumni and it has some international prestige. Like, it's known when you mention NIDA most of the time, that can be worth having on your resume and getting people to take some notice of you, at least early on when you first get out of NIDA. But it's not the be all and end all. So these courses are only as good as what you're going to put in and what you make of them. And it's also, I think, important to remember, if you're thinking about going to drama school, that, like, you don't necessarily need the school. The school needs you. The school needs students. Now, in my case, I did need the school. So I'm contradicting myself a bit here, but I'm hoping you understand what I mean, in the sense that I needed to train, And going to NIDA was my way to understand how to use my instrument as an artist, how to use my voice properly, my body. It widened my range of texts that I knew. I got to meet amazing people. And that's one of the things about drama school, is that you get to meet all these people who are trying to make work as well, or make it in your same line of work. These are your friends, but hopefully they can also be your future collaborators. And so it's worthwhile in that sense to start making those connections. And then these places will, especially a place like NIDA, which honestly is one of the fanciest, well-funded drama schools in the world. And I know it's been struggling over the years financially, but when people come from other drama schools who haven't, visiting from somewhere else, they sort of look around and they go, oh my gosh, this is the nicest looking drama school I've ever seen. Like that building, all that space, the theatres that are available to the students. I think that's something I really relished when I was there. And then being in Sydney. So getting out of Perth, and again, nothing wrong with Perth, but for me, I had to leave. I had to get out of my comfort zone and go somewhere else. And for me, NIDA was a very special time for me, and I did miss it a lot when I first graduated, partly because I missed acting all the time. And that's the other great thing about going to a drama school, is that you get to do the acting every day. You're working on your craft every day for 3 years. And it's great to learn on the job if those jobs are available to you. But for me, in that case, that wasn't an option for me. I don't think I was really going to get looked at unless I'd gone through drama school. And look, I've know about actors who had careers when they were younger and then ended up going to NIDA anyway because they wanted to expand their understanding of craft. So they weren't just, I guess, winging it all the time. Because we can get very hung up on the innate talent. And as well as I do, you've been in casting rooms, I'm sure. You've worked with many other actors where, like, everyone's good. If you're making stuff, everyone's talented. But training is a way to also, like, open up the scope of what you can do as well. And in my case, it gave me, like, a lot of inner confidence to actually say I am an actor, because I didn't really believe I was an actor. I would say I secretly believed I was an actor, but I didn't want to admit it to anyone in case they thought I was a fraud. But then while I was at NIDA, I finally was able to start saying, yes, I'm an actor.
And going forward, I have read that you did a little bit of improv, both at the Improv Theatre Sydney and at the Upright Citizens Brigade, which is actually one of the most prestigious improv schools in the world, improv groups in the world. And what was that like? Do you find that improv is sort of an exercise for the actor, or do you find that it's a language in itself that you would practice and you would regard as a proper show?
Yes. Bit of column A, bit of column B. First up, I'll give the caveat that the class I did at Upright Citizens Brigade was the Improv 101 class. And I did that with the funds from the Mike Walsh Fellowship when I went over to New York. And I'd been to New York before and I'd seen some of their shows and I went, look, I want to do a bit of that. So I did that class, and then at Improv Theatre Sydney, I did the Actor Accelerator class, which is sort of their levels 1 and level 2. And I've been itching to get back and do all their other levels, but I've just had other things going on. I tend to teach the nights they have classes on. And then, now I have a child. So that adds another thing into the mix. What I would say is improvised theatre is its own beast, for sure, because requires its own set of techniques, particularly if you're talking about improvised comedy. And acting is also a separate thing. But if you draw a circle that's improvisation and you draw a circle that's acting and you put them a little closer together, there's definitely some overlap. So I would say, like, there's a reason we use improvisation as teachers in our work, particularly when we're working with younger actors, but even adults, is that it's a great way to get you up on the floor straight away. And when I was at NIDA, the improv class was actually the only class for the first part of the year where we actually sometimes felt like we were acting because we were getting up on the floor. So improvisation can teach you to listen. It can work that muscle to be in the present moment, to really embrace what's happening, to cultivate a sense of play and joy, which is something you need as an actor, and to like be spontaneous, so living in the moment. The criticism I've heard of actors doing improvisation, I once had a teacher who went on a bit of a rant about this, mainly because I asked him. He said, improv isn't good for actors. And I went, what? Why? Tell me why. And his take on it was that improvisation forces the actor to be a writer, and that's not what an actor does. A writer is meant to take the text and bring that to life. They're an experiential artist. So all the tools that an actor might be using when they're improvising, they're focusing on like the next funny line, the next thing to say or moment. And I do get what that teacher was saying for sure. But improvisation, like what I did while a student at NIDA, our improv teacher, Lynn Pierce, who's literally written the book on improvisation here in Australia, what she was teaching us is our first class, she was like, look, we're not doing improvisation comedy, and it's not that we're not going to laugh. We will be laughing all the time. But what I'm trying to teach you is improvisation for the actor. So it was all about grounding it in Stanislavski's who, what, when, why, given circumstances. And we were doing a lot of exercises where we were building backstories for characters. We were working on our observation skills and how to use that and bring it into our character work. And we did this amazing exercise called The Wedding, which I'll never forget, where over the course of about 10 weeks or so, we were split into two groups, and we would improvise the history of a family somewhere in Australia. So my group, we had the country group. We had the family that had a farm, and we started in 1956, and we then like jumped ahead and did episodes in the lives of these characters. And so I got to play this character from when he was about 8 years old to when he was in his 60s. And the other group were working on a set of characters that were based in Sydney and Darlinghurst. And then all we knew is, and we didn't know what they were doing for about 10 weeks. All we knew is that in their group, they had an actor who was going to be the bride. And in our group, we had an actor who was going to be the groom. And then they did their own little improvisation where their characters met. And we finished off the term by having a wedding. So we had 4 hours straight of improvisation. And I remember we even, my housemate and I, we walked to NIDA in character because we only lived up the road. So we got dressed, we got into character, we walked to NIDA in character, and we had the wedding, we had the reception, and all of us had envelopes given to us by the teacher outlining a whole bunch of like objectives and story beats that we were encouraged to explore. We didn't have to achieve everything, but it was what we were driving towards. And it was all drawn from the work we'd done over the last 10 weeks. So there was no moment where someone like pulled a gun on someone else and killed someone or anything like that. It was that we'd done all this work on building the inner life of these characters, that we could just be there. And that's when I started to realize, oh, acting's just being. And so I think that's also really helpful for actors to explore improvisation. And it's something I try to bring into my own room when I'm teaching. And I don't always get the opportunity to go as in-depth as I would like, because most of the time I'm just teaching sort of the basic thing of, not the basic, the fundamentals of, here's how to make an offer, here's how to say yes, and here's how to build on an idea, which is also really important because that's building that collaborative understanding between actors and performers. So it definitely translates that way. And then if I have a class that the students are a bit older and we have a bit more time, and it's written that way by the institution to explore stuff in a little more depth, then I get to really play with that stuff, and it's so much fun because it's so immersive, that kind of work, even if it's for only 2 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Amazing.
I don't know, have you done much improv?
Yes, I love improv.
Yeah.
I find it, like you said, it's a beast of its own. It's really hard, and I love it. I'm doing the level 2 at the Improv Theatre Sydney right now.
Oh, fantastic!
I joined it.
Oh, who's teaching?
3 weeks ago. Yeah, it's such a pleasant experience, even if when things go south, even if the scene is shit, it's still good.
And it teaches you how to fail as well. So you've just kind of got to sit in that failure sometimes. I'm keen to get back in and do some more of it because I have to teach it so much. I feel very much like, I should do some more classes to hone my own understanding and maybe get some new exercises. But that's bringing up another thing of, like, the training never stops. There's always something new to discover. But I think if you're talking about improvisational comedy, which is very much the brand of a place like Upright Citizens Brigade, and more just the craft of acting, the chasm's a bit bigger because improvisational sketch comedy is even more its own beast. That said, though, when I was doing that class, and I think, and you'll probably find this in your own class right now, is that it's not about making the jokes all the time. All the early exercises you do is about finding that truth within the moment. So listening, taking in an idea, and then actually hearing it and building on it rather than just throwing it away so you can just do your own thing.
Exactly. And I'm going to jump into that trip to the US. And my first question is, what was it like? Did you feel much of a difference between Australia and the US when you went over there? Was there a difference between what you had done as an actor in Australia and how you saw that American actors approached the craft? How was it like?
It was different, and there's some similarities. So first up, I first went over there as an adult to New York because my partner actually went to the Stella Adler studio in New York. So I went over there to visit her, and she was there for 4 years, all up in the end. So my first visit, I went for 2 months and I stayed for 4, and then I had to come back to Australia to do a show. I toured, and then I went back over with the Mike Walsh Fellowship. So I'd done a bit of sort of research and groundwork about what I wanted to do. So like I said, I went to a UCB show and went, oh, maybe I'll come back and do that. So the first thing I noticed, one of the first things I noticed is that the quality of work in a place like New York was just as hit and miss as it is here. And I very much put sort of Broadway, New York theatre up on this pedestal. And then I'm realizing, oh, no, there's just as many terrible shows here. Sorry, there are more terrible shows here. The difference between New York and Australia is the quality of work is the same, but there's just more. There's just more. So if a show here in Sydney isn't received as well, or isn't putting as many bums on seats, which is a shame, it's kind of unfair because there's sort of you've got Sydney Theatre Company, you've got Belvoir. What other companies do you have? Bell Shakespeare, and then you've got the independent companies like the Old Fitz Theatre and Downstairs Belvoir, and you start to run out of places very quickly about where you can go and see work. And the cultural representation of Sydney itself is resting on the shoulders of just one theatre company, and that's not fair. Rather than in America, you can go on just one street on Broadway, and there's 10 different shows on, maybe more. So I found I was going to see a lot of stuff, and some of it was amazing, and some of it was a bit like, yeah, whatever. And I was just realizing, it's the quality of work is the same. It's just as hit and miss. There's just more. The difference I saw, because I started going to some of the performances at some of the student performances at Stella Adler, and what I was seeing there, which sort of stuck out to me, is the actors there weren't afraid to kind of go for the big emotions straight off the bat. That they were all about kind of delving into like whatever psychological depths they could find straight away. And Australian actors, at least this is very generalized. So this comes from my experience when I was at drama school, where sometimes we were getting notes that we were being too polite. We were being too nice to each other. And it's like, no, come on, you've got to really go for it, go for the jugular. Have you heard of the tall poppy syndrome?
Of course.
Yeah. So for our listeners who don't know, our international listeners, the tall poppy syndrome, in Australia, if any of the poppies grow higher than the other poppies, we cut that poppy down because we don't want that poppy getting too tall. In America, they don't have the tall poppy syndrome. So if you walk into a room and you say, I'm the greatest, they might go, oh, maybe you are. Rather than here in Australia, you walk into a room and you say, hey, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. People kind of go, you're a bit full of it, mate. So I think you're a bit full of it. Even if they are really good at what they do. It's like, meh. In the States, that's something I had to fight against within myself, to actually walk into a space and assert myself and go, you know what, I know what I'm doing. And that was kind of freeing as well. When I went back to New York for the second time, and I was doing the Mike Walsh Fellowship program, and that I put together, and then I was just like auditioning for as many things as I could. So a lot of indie stuff, and just looking at listings every day, and just kind of putting myself into rooms and not worrying so much about how it went, because I kind of thought, well, I'm a little different because I have an Australian accent, so that makes me a little bit different, even though there's plenty of Australians in New York. And I've trained, and I've just finished a 6-month tour around Australia. So, I know what it means to work. I know what it means to be an actor. So I'm just going to come in here and do my thing. And I found actually when I came back to Australia after being in New York for 2.5 years, so that's how long I was there for that stint, was that suddenly I got a little more self-conscious again because our industry is so small. More of the auditions felt like the be-all and end-all. Because I went, if I go in and this person sees me and they don't like what I've done, they might not see me again for another 10 years. Rather than in the States, if I go in and I do something and they kind of go, oh, yeah, whatever, there's another room next door for me to try out as well. There are more doors for me to knock on and try and find my people.
And I find, I'm going to give you an example to ask if there is this sort of thing as well. So in Brazil, I come from Brazil, and there are many...
What?
Yes, I do. And there are many different cities in Brazil, but most of the entertainment industry sits in Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo.
Yeah.
And Rio de Janeiro has all the TV networks. So every actor in
Mm-hmm.
Rio de Janeiro, they're just one step away from being cast at a big soap opera or a big TV show. So
Mm.
there, I feel like people in Rio de Janeiro, they are giving it all the time, because
Mm-hmm.
all it takes is one big shot at a big TV show and you will make it. Whereas in Sao Paulo, you have theater, you have a few TV shows, you have a few feature films, you have things that are not quite as popular, but that will sustain you. Will you'll be able to make a living, but you're not as
Mm-hmm.
close to being a big hit. So you're playing, but it's not as live fast, die young. It's not as be all end all the time. Whereas in Rio de Janeiro,
Mm-hmm.
you're so close to making it that if you just put in that extra effort, if you got one shot, you can actually make it and be, at least for a few years or at least for a season, the hit. Is that
Mm-hmm.
the feeling that you get when you're in the US? Is that you're so close to being a movie star? Or is it not? That's not the point. It's not the point of making it. It's something else.
It depends on what's going on for you at the time. So, for context, like when I went over there, yeah, I had this Mike Walsh fellowship, and I had some funds to discover New York and try and get into some rooms and stuff. But a lot of the stuff I was going for was like independent work, a lot of student work. So the directing course at Columbia University that Anne Bogart used to run, or still runs, I'm not sure. Like they, much like the director shows at NIDA, if you've seen those, like the directors had to put on their thesis productions. So like I did one of those productions to try and start to find my way in and meet people. And that was my window into doing some stuff at the film school as well, which is a slightly separate entity. But they're, people talk. And so I met an actor on a production I did, and they went, "Oh, I know this filmmaker. She's Australian and she needs someone for this thing. So I put your name forward." But in terms of like being a step away from being a movie star, I wasn't represented at the time. I didn't have an agent. And I made a couple of tries at getting some representation in New York, but also I knew I was going to leave at some point. So um,
But I
I
mean,
don't think I had it.
do you find that there is this thing in the air, or is it not that
I
leap?
I didn't find
No.
it personally because I didn't have enough clout professionally to kind of knock on doors and have some of them open for me. So there were still quite a few doors close to me. What I did find though is that in a place like New York, which is such a like it's a financial center of the world and it's an a cultural center of the world. Like so it draws people from all over America and all over the globe who want to make art. And so I was meeting a lot of people who I wouldn't necessarily be meeting them in the context of like we're doing a show together. Like I meet them in the coffee shop and they're like, "Oh, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an actor, I'm a performer." And so there was kind of this sense of like I didn't feel as sheepish about saying I was an actor or a performer all the time because I knew there was so many of us around and everyone's trying to like make some stuff happen. I guess you can never quite know where one thing leads because I was meeting like there was a audition I went for very early on that I found on a website called Backstage, and they were looking for an Australian actor for this web series. And I met the guy and he was very nice, and he didn't end up casting me, but he remembered me. And then 2 years down the track, a friend of his from film school, from when he went to film school, was making their first feature film, and they'd written 3 Australian characters, and it was a very low budget indie, but they needed someone who could do the accent, someone they could afford, and someone who was cleared to actually work in the country. They knew that their other friend had been trying to cast some Aussies a few years ago. They went, "Do you know anyone?" And this guy passed on my name, and I ended up getting a gig that way. And if I'd stayed in New York, I think I could have kept pushing at it and maybe started to find some other avenues, because stuff might have, well, you just don't know. But yeah, potentially. Okay, so maybe the answer is yes. You can get looked at by the right person, because everyone's got their foot in different doors. And a director I worked with who I got on with really well, and I'm really proud of what we did. And I knew at the time they were building themselves up. They had their foot in a lot of doors, and I'm still in touch with them, and I can see that work is paying off. But also, it's accumulative. So they've been going at this for a long time, and now finally they've been given lots of opportunities that are worthwhile. But more recently, they've received a particular opportunity that, hopefully will really put them on the map more and lead to the next thing. So I guess the answer is maybe yes. I didn't necessarily always feel that in the air, because there were also periods of time while I was in New York where I felt like I was kind of doing nothing, and I had to eventually get a real job and start working in a call center and stuff to make ends meet. But I guess art is woven into the fabric of the city, a place like New York. I was listening to your other episode with Sarah Jane earlier, and it was really interesting to hear about her experience in LA, which I'd only heard bits and pieces about over the years. I've felt that when I went to LA very briefly for a film festival, and everyone's trying to be an actor, everyone's trying to make it in the film business, to the point that that's all that place is. Rather, I found New York was the art is part of the city, but it's not the only thing that defines New York. And so you can have a fuller and sort of richer and more exciting living experience.
And you also did Shakespeare in the US. You did actually a lot of Shakespeare in the US. How was that experience like?
Yeah, I wish I'd done. I look. It's nice that you say you've done lots of Shakespeare. I wish I had done more Shakespeare, not just in the US but here in Australia as well, because it's good stuff. I did the Scranton Shakespeare Festival, and I did that because they were doing a production of Richard III, and I had met the director of that production maybe a couple of years prior through a friend of a friend at a party, who had seen me in the first show I did in New York, which was a production of the Scottish play. Well, I just played it was a very big cast, and so I was kind of just part of this ensemble, but I came on as one of the murderers, and I just ate an apple in this scene as I was getting orders. And this director remembered me from that, and then from the conversation we had at this party. And then I saw, they're doing Richard III. All right, I'm going to give that a crack, because I've always wanted to do that part. But they won't want an Australian Richard. But I was wrong. And it was one of those nice things where a director, one of those rare things where a director said to me, look, I want to do this play, and the version of the play I want to do is the one with you in it. And I went, oh, okay, I better make this happen. So I wouldn't say, I guess I wouldn't say my process of approaching Shakespeare in America was any different to how I would approach it here in Australia. There was one question early on, which was, do I do this in my own accent or an American accent? And we decided very quickly that I would just do my own voice. And I think that makes sense for classical work. If we were doing a piece that was very specifically set in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is where the festival was on, then yeah, I might make some changes and do a particular accent. But all the actors came over to. We all stayed in Pennsylvania and rehearsed for a month or so, and then did the festival. But most of us were New York based, and there was quite a range of folks. Like the festival started because there were some folks from Scranton living in New York who decided to put on A Midsummer Night's Dream. It went really well. Like they put it on their hometown in Scranton. It went really well, so they thought we're going to do this every year, and it got bigger and bigger. But most of us were based in New York, but from all over the world. So there were definitely some folks from other parts of America. There were a few Brits, and then there was me, the one Australian. So yeah, I don't think it was too different regarding my process, but it certainly was one of the nicest, most rewarding collaborative experiences I've had working with a director, just personally. And it was a great part.
Yeah.
And I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
And is there anything that you find that is different from playing other plays, from playing other writers, as to playing Shakespeare? So you've done Richard III, you've done Troilus and Cressida, you've done Othello, you've played Iago in Othello, and you've done Macbeth.
Yeah, I was very lucky with that one. I did that. That was my first sort of main stage show at NIDA. So I got to be Iago opposite Logie Award-winning actor Rob Collins. And I said to him, we should do the show again. And he gets very... he seems to have heart palpitations every time I bring it up. So I don't know what that means. I guess I must have done a very good job in the role. It's a running joke between us. So, sorry, what was the question?
If you find that there's a difference between playing Shakespeare and playing other writers,
sure.
Is there an approach that you find that, oh yeah, I found that this connects me to Shakespeare's plays, or is there a way that you have to go through the lines?
Yes, Elizabethan theatre, classical work, does require you to approach it in a certain way. And I think when we were sort of prepping for this, and we were kind of discussing, when we were prepping for recording this episode, and you were discussing, like, is there a particular way to do it, and or should people just go for it and give it a try? And it's like, yeah, you should absolutely jump in, give it a try. But there is a form to it, and you're going to have a lot more fun doing classical work, and specifically Shakespeare, if you understand the inherent rules that he was writing for. So how the iambic pentameter works, and how the stress, the da-dum, 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 is placed on the words so that it makes sense, how punctuation can help you. So if there's a full stop in the middle of a line, that means the end of a thought, but it also, if it's in the middle of the line, then you jump into the next thought. And that's something that can help you as an actor, because that gives you a sense of what's going on for the character. How he plays with vowels and consonants to make the audience actually like feel a sense of what's going on emotionally in the story and for these characters. And so I think you have to embrace the form to really appreciate it and understand why it's so special in the first place, and why we, for want of a better term, put it up on the pedestal as like the best example of writing in the English, I was going to say the best example of writing in the English language, and I couldn't say the best example of writing in the English language. I'm stumbling over my words. So that's why I should also do more Shakespeare, because it also requires muscularity as well. It's got to be heard. You have to speak it well. And when I say you got to speak it well, it's not that you do it in, there's this idea of Shakespeare being spoken in that kind of very clipped, received pronunciation, Laurence Olivier, John Gielgud. And have you ever heard original pronunciation?
I don't think I have. No.
Oh, it's worth looking. No, it's a lot of fun to look up because they've reconstructed the dialect from Shakespeare's time. Some scholars have dived in, rebuilt the dialect, and the Royal Shakespeare Company did some productions, and they've done some productions using original pronunciation, OP as they call it. And it's just amazing what comes out of it because it's a much earthier vocal quality that you hear. And you hear rhymes that we lose now because of the way our current dialects have changed. There's a lot more rhotic R's. Like some Americans can freak out about doing Shakespeare, even though their dialect can in some ways sound closer to what it actually sounded like in some aspects. So the point I'm making here is that, like, yeah, there's a way to do Shakespeare in that you need to understand how the language is put together and how it's written and what iambic pentameter is doing for you. But also don't get stuck in your idea of what you think Shakespeare is, that it's sort of very highbrow and only for a very particular kind of actor, because like he was the popular entertainment of his day. It's full of dirty jokes. I think young actors should definitely give Shakespeare a crack because there are so many wonderful characters in his work. And he's one of those writers that was starting to find a sense of psychological realism that, not that they defined it that way. Shakespeare's audience, the Elizabethans, didn't sit there going, "Oh, this is very psychologically realistic." Like that's very much our modern lens coming to it. But he was creating a greater depth to these characters that made them feel more human. But you've got to embrace it for what it is, and you got to say the words. You got to know what the words mean and what they meant to the Elizabethans. But all the resources are there. Like there's a program called Playing Shakespeare that the BBC did in the 1980s, and you watch it and it's just all the best British actors just hanging out, smoking, talking with the head of the RSC about how to approach Shakespeare, what makes it different to our contemporary performing practice, and all the little things in there, all the little rules that help us as artists. And they go through it. It's such a wealth of information. And I'm pretty sure it's just on YouTube right now, like as a bootleg version. But Shakespeare's been around long enough that like a quick Google search will yield so much information on how to approach one of his pieces.
Is that something you do often? Do you research things from the real life, from the news, for your characters?
It depends. I think I do less of it now. Like when I'm talking about Iago, it's from, I was in second year NIDA. In first year, we had a teacher who was very big on research. And I still think research is really important. But I'm getting better at understanding what thing I need to look into and research. So it used to be I'd sort of kind of look at everything I could. And these days it's more like what's important, what actually shows up in the story that's being told, and is it helpful for me to research? So like in contrast, a character like Bert the Burger Man, who is the character I play in a children's show called Rat Burger, which I did earlier this year, we did discuss one news story and then we didn't talk about it again because it was just too sad. And when you look at the real world implications of a character like that who wants to capture rats and turn them into burgers. So what I was then exploring more was like the original book the play was based on, and then kind of exploring the tradition of that character where it's more of a like he is the monster coming to get you, rather than a real world serial killer, because that's too scary and doesn't serve what we're creating.
Sure.
So yeah, but I certainly would, if I have the time as well, try and do as much research as I can to just like, yeah, get into the world of the play. But I do, I find I'm doing less of it now. But that's mainly because the projects I've been doing haven't required that as much.
And you mentioned Redburger. You've mentioned your work on children's theater. And how did that happen in your life? How did you start with children's theater? And how do you go about it? How does it work? How is it different from playing to adults?
Well, I think every show, every piece of theatre that you do, every project requires different things of you as an actor. And I think we've discussed this before, and even some of the other guests on your podcast have said similar things, that like every project demands a different thing. My first gig out of NIDA was a children's show. And when it was offered to me, I was a bit like, oh, look, I love kids shows, but is this really like, this is going to be my first thing? And that was Too Many Elephants in This House, based on the esteemed children's book of the same name. It's a lovely book, actually. But I said yes, and I'm so glad I did, because it then reminded me very quickly that like that's where my first experience of the theatre happened. I was a kid, and I was taken to shows, performances, musical concerts, but I really got to hand it to my mum and my dad. Like they tried to get us to things and see stuff, and those, some of those shows I saw as a kid are the most significant theatrical experiences of my life. And then you start doing kids shows and you realize, oh, now I'm part of an experience like that for a kid, and I'm part of forming a core memory for a young child. So I get to be the guy that they, instead of going to school today, they all got on a bus and they came to the theatre and they got to see this show, Too Many Elephants in This House, and they got to have a big laugh. And that show in particular, we always did a Q&A afterwards. And it was just lovely always hearing all the questions, and they wanted to know how things worked and how we did mouse puppets and elephants dropping in and out and sets moving. And you just kind of get to introduce them to this world and throw a bit of magic into their life. Performing for kids they are the most honest audience. If they don't like it, they tend to tell you. I have been in the audience of a show where I've heard a kid call out, "This is boring." And this was like a multi-million-dollar production. There were animatronic creatures on stage and that sort of thing. And I just had to laugh. But with a show for kids, they're very quick to express that they're appreciating it. And when I did Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie back in 2016, and I had a young family member come along, and after the show, he was so excited, and he was just like, "How do you learn all those words?" And I was like, "Did you enjoy it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I could just see in his face like how much joy it had brought him that afternoon. And I went, this is what it's really about. And so when I did a show like Ratburger, this was my debut at the Sydney Opera House. And I was talking to one of the producers when we first were bumping in, and they were like, "So is this your first time here?" And I was like, yeah. But I always kind of imagined I'd be doing Hamlet or Richard III at the Opera House. And they said, quite rightly, they're like, "Look, I think, those performances would be great, but I reckon you're making more impact with this role." And I went, "Yeah, I reckon you are." I reckon you're right. Yeah, for sure. That yeah, I could be doing Hamlet, but at the end of the day, I'm going to make more of an impact as Bert the Burger Man trying to catch Dapper the Rat for all those kids who came to see the show on the school holidays.
I think
I
so
think
too.
kids theatre is great. Yeah. Kids theatre is great to do. I think every actor should do it because it keeps you on your toes. It keeps you nimble. And there, maybe just before we move on, I think one of the biggest differences is that, and you'll know this, they're highly physical shows. So they demand a lot of your body. In fact, they're going to demand every aspect of your technique as an actor, that it's worth giving it a crack because it will get you fit creatively and physically.
And I think, of my personal experience, it's more interactive in a way that even though you expect kids to behave in a theater, you expect them to sit and watch. As that boy you mentioned, they will say out loud what they think, and sometimes they'll interact and they'll say, yeah, the villain is hiding behind that door.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and that's a big part, I think, of not that you have to actually address that, but most of the times you don't. But it's part of the experience for everyone.
When we were on Snugglepot, so I was touring that show for about 5 months, and it was towards the end of our run. We were in Sydney, and there was this scene where, so do you know anything about Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie?
Unfortunately, not.
No, that's understandable because unless you're from Australia, you won't really know what I'm talking about. So May Gibbs was a West Australian illustrator who was living in. She was from Western Australia, and she about 100 years ago was drawing the Gumnut Babies. So this book isn't hers; it's sort of like kind of playing on her world. But I read this book to my son every now and then when he goes to bed. So good night, Gumnuts. So yeah, the story of the show was the Gumnut Baby, Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie go to they're looking for a human, and there was this scene where they see a human and it's giant, and we have a moment where we go, oh, was like the human's gone. We go, oh, was that a human? And there was always kind of this quiet and like moment of awe. We'd take a breath, and then the show would just continue. But towards the end of the run, there was just one day where there was this kind of rowdy school group in Sydney, and I just went, "Was that a human?" And suddenly, all these kids just going, "Yes!" And we were all like, "What do we do? We haven't prepared for this." We just let the wave wash over and let them enjoy the moment. There weren't too many "He's behind you" scenes in that show. When I did Too Many Elephants, there was. The writer-director of that, she actively wrote the play wanting to have no "He's behind you" scenes, and then accidentally wrote the ultimate "He's behind you" scene. So we had this scene where my character, Eric, who was the kid who has too many elephants, was in the kitchen talking to his mum with his elephant friend who was jumping in and out of the fridge. And there was this amazing fridge prop where the guy playing the elephant could like open it up and disappear and then come out. And the kids were just losing their minds to the point that the show kind of stopped. And the actor playing the mum had to be like, all right, that's enough. Stop, like directly to the audience, stop laughing. And they just kept laughing more. So we even had to like workshop that scene a bit so it wasn't so perfect because... Yeah, it was adding another 10 minutes to the performance.
Amazing.
But it's lovely.
Amazing.
It's lovely that they're getting into it.
Amazing. And I find that being an actor, being an artist, we're always between that thing where we're striving for recognition, and recognition could be actually being making an impact in young kids' lives, because those kids, for instance, as you were telling your experience, both as an audience in your early days and as an actor, I reminded of my first time, the first recollection I have of going to the theater and watching an actor, and for me it was one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever seen in my life. Was an actor that was playing a rooster that walked on stage as a chicken and just made a few sounds under the lights, and that was so magical because I could see that was a person, but I could see at the same time it was a rooster and at the crack of dawn. And that's one of the things that made me pursue this career, and
Mm.
it's still with me to this day. And if you go to the theater today, probably if you go and ask the audience who here went to the theater as a kid, as a child, 70% of them will say, yes, I
Yeah.
went to the theater when I was a child, and that's why I keep coming to the theater today. And of course, that has a
How
huge
old?
impact in their lives.
Oh, yeah. How old were you when you saw that rooster?
I don't think I was. I think I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe I was 6 or 7. I'm gonna take you back to another of your not one of your shows, but your short film, Mistress in the
Oh,
Forest,
right. Yeah.
and that's a short film that you wrote and you performed in. And it tells the story of an artist that's obsessed with dinosaurs and has to come up with a new character that reveals herself to him in a dream. And the short film made into several film festivals around the world, and it even
Mm.
represented Australia in a Russian film festival. How was for you to be the creative mind behind a short film?
What I will say is I learned so much from the experience of making that thing, and I'm proud of it. It's also like been almost 10 years since we actually shot it. And so there's a part of me that if I watch it now, I I can struggle to separate myself from uh, basically the actor who wanted to make that film and the actor I am now, or the creative person I am now, has learned a lot. And so I look at it and go, oh, there's so much I'd do differently. But I only know all that stuff because I went about doing it. You know what I mean? Like the act of actually trying to create a thing is the reason I have more knowledge now. And Mistress of the Forest started as like I'd been out of drama school just over a year, and there were a few other people I knew who were like kind of making their own things. They made a short film, they made a web series, and I got really angry at myself because I went, "Oh, look, why aren't I doing that?" So I thought I'm going to make a thing, and I sort of looked at like what was something I could do that would be a little more special or help it stand out. And so before I went to NIDA, I did a degree in multimedia design. I wanted to be an illustrator and an animator, and I realized I didn't have the patience to be an animator. But I love drawing, and I was, as I mentioned, I was the kid at school who was drawing dinosaurs and dragons in the back of his maths book. And so I sort of thought, let's turn that into a character. Goodness me. So I thought, let's turn that into a character. And I had this idea that, like, I just wanted to put my friend Eleanor in a really cool cape and kind of Celtic warrior makeup. And I was just looking around going, look, I know some really fun actors. I know some designers. Like, let's get some people who are really good at what they do and just make a thing. And I wanted to see how far I could get without money. So it was mainly made on a budget of goodwill, with a bit of cash out of my own pocket. And so when I look at my goals in making that thing, and what we ended up with, I achieved those goals. I made the short film on a budget of goodwill. I finished it. I got it polished enough that I felt like I could send it to people, and I got it into some film festivals. And one film festival I really loved was Film Quest in Utah, which is so we found it was getting embraced more by like genre film festivals. So Film Quest in Utah embraced it, and that was one of the festivals I was really hoping they take the film on, because they hold a lot of events as part of their festivals. So that was one of the ones I actually went over for the screening. So I was living in New York at the time. We flew to Salt Lake and then went down to Provo in Utah, and a lot of other filmmakers had flown in. So I met lots of really cool people, and it is really amazing. I think it's important to remind yourself that, like, if you've got an idea for a thing, make the thing, finish the thing, and put it out there. And if it's a terrible thing, then nobody will much care. You might get a few grumpy messages on socials or something like that. But really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to matter. But chances are, if you make something and put it out there, there's going to be someone who likes it. And then you make another connection with that person. And so I got to meet some really cool filmmakers, people who made feature films. And they're saying to me, "Hey, I like your little short movie." And I go, "Oh, really? You like mine? That's awesome. You must be wrong." I didn't say that, but but I'm just really chuffed to be having a conversation about making more stuff, and that galvanizes you to make more things. Now, I say that, and I haven't made a short film since, but I will one day. I've been honing my craft, learning more,
And
a lot of teaching.
And in regards to that, sometimes I find that I myself, and I see many people doing that, but
Yeah.
we underestimate the power of small initiatives. Not saying your short film is a small initiative, because I know the effort it takes to create a short
Yeah.
film.
No, I'm
It's
sure
a
you do.
huge
Yeah.
effort. But sometimes we find, oh, it's a short film, or it's a podcast, or it's a play. But I find that, as you said about New York, it's woven into the culture of the city. It's woven. Our arts are woven. Is woven into the fabric of the city, and I find that each of those things that we consider small, although they're not, they are slowly creating the fabric of a culture of this era, this time, of this period in time, where artists go out there, they talk about their craft, they create a short film or they create a play, and in 20 years' time, people will look, or 40 years' time or 60 years' time, people will say, oh, remember in 2024 when they still shot their films and Mistress in the Forest was was an Australian short film that made into festivals around the world. And those connections, although they may seem circumstantial or even random, in the great scheme of things, I think there's some sort of magic into those things. I've been thinking about this a little bit. I'd like to hear what you think about it too.
Well, I think it sort of is this nice thematic thread coming up in all these conversations on your podcast. Is that like in your first episode? Apologies. What was the name of your first guest?
Hasibula Kushkaki.
Yeah, Hasibula. Listening to Hasibula's talk about how, like, if you're a creative, you kind of got to put in like a good 10 years plus to really be working on your stuff, like a doctor would. That as if you're working in the medical profession, like you got to put in years of study and then you qualify, and then you work on your specialization, and then finally you get out there and you start earning the cash. And it's a little bit different for the artistic world because there isn't kind of one clear step to the next step, which is what makes it hard for us. But I think there's something to be said in the accumulation of experience and work, and it's really cool to hear. Like it's really wonderful to hear sort of all the guests you've spoken to. They're not necessarily people that if you say their name, someone in the street knows who they are. But these are all guests who are actively working on their craft and living a life with art as an integral part of it. And so they're always investigating their craft. And I think that's what makes you ready for when that big opportunity does come along. And look, I'm trying to make peace with the fact that maybe that big opportunity won't come along for me, but I know I want to have a life in art. And so I will keep doing what I do to, because it's me. It's me. It's who I am. And none of the experiences I have are wasted experiences, because I think it's very easy as a creative to get jaded as well. And you look at there's if I looked at it from one perspective, I'd be like, oh gosh, I've just done kids shows. Yeah, I was on at the Sydney Opera House, but it was just a kids show, whatever. Well, that's a bit you're never going to be happy even when the big thing comes along. So I think appreciate it in the moment. So when I was doing that gig and I was on my way to the Opera House, I was going, look, this is my place of work. I know the young version of me never would have imagined I'd be coming here to do a show. I'm going to be proud of this moment. I'm going to take this win. So yeah, I think what you're saying about the small things, those small things build up, but you've got to keep doing those small things as well.
I'm sure you're not gonna accept this because you're a very humble person, but you're such a talented person. You play the violin. You're a graphic designer. You wrote and produced and performed in a short film that made into international festivals. You're a performer. You are someone that lives and is able to earn a living from your art. And that's not just anything. Do you find that, as Nicolas Cage would put it on his feature film, the weight of immense talent or something like that, I forgot the actual name, do you find that there is a downside to having a lot of talent?
Oh, every day. It's the curse I bear.
Or is it as interesting as it sounds?
Well, first up, what I'll say is I appreciate you. I appreciate everything you've just said, and I'm trying to be humble, but secretly I'm lapping it up. I think what can be hard sometimes, and I don't mean to put a downer on the whole thing, but it's if you're in the room as an actor, sometimes it's hard for you to be seen as something else as well, like the full scope of who you are. We like to categorize people, and I've done it as well, where you kind of think someone's one thing and then you realize, oh, but actually they have all these other skills. They might be an actor, but also there's some really amazing directing ability here, or they can be a choreographer, or there's other aspects to what they can do that you just hadn't thought of yet. I don't know if I'd say is it hard being so talented? I mean, you and I both know it's hard trying to get everyone to realize how talented you are. You want everyone to realize that you're amazing at what you do, and you're full of so much potential. And there's certainly been those people in my life who have looked at what I can do and think, yep, that's the guy, let's bring him in. And it's only with 10 years hindsight that I kind of look back and I go, oh, did I really know what I was doing? So I think it's important. I know I'm sort of getting on a bit of a tangent here and not quite staying on the same thread, but I think it is important for creatives as well to try and embrace the fact that you might not just get to be one thing as well. You've got to wear many hats. And in my case, more recently, that's been actor and then coach. And that's the way I've found a lot of fulfillment in coaching other actors and having to explain a process or an approach to the craft in a way that they can understand means I now understand it better too. So yeah, I just wish everyone in the industry was like you, Gerardo, who saw me for the shining beacon of artistic.
I'm not that humble, so I know I have a
distilled.
talent, but my talent is being able to see people's talents. I'm proud of that. I am able to tell. My wife is here; she's listening to it, and I know how lucky I am because I know how talented she is, and I know how talented you are. I think that's my special power. I'm able to tell people's talents. So, Nick, one more thing that I would like to ask about your work as an acting coach. How did that come about, and how is your approach? What is your approach with actors that you coach?
So it kind of came about where when you're an actor, and you know this, you often self-tape and you need to be a reader and read for another actor. And I found I was helping actor friends with self-taping, and they started to say to me, hey, you're the guy I want to call when I put down a self-tape, because and I'm always very careful about giving feedback to another actor in the sense that I don't, like if I'm in the room working with another actor, I won't give a note unless they specifically ask me, hey, is there anything you want to talk about or anything you've noticed? Because I don't think that's your role as an actor on the floor. That's what the director does. And you're just meant to do what you do and work off what they're giving you. But when you're working on an audition, it's a little bit different, and sometimes, you know, I would sort of open up like, hey, do you want any thoughts or any offers to help you find something new in it? And I was helping a friend, a good friend, put down a tape for a big TV show that when we got to the end of putting down that tape, he just said, hey, I've just had a great time. And like, this is a guy who tests a lot for projects, but he mentioned it was some of the most fun he'd had. And he was very much like texting me afterwards saying, hey, like, you should run a workshop or something. You should do stuff. And I was kind of like, yeah, maybe. And it was something I'd always been toying with in my head, because when you're an actor and you're kind of going, look, I'm not getting any jobs. How do I earn money? And especially when I was in New York as well, I sort of thought, oh, do I want to maybe start trying to like teach people how to self-tape and that sort of thing? And I didn't really get round to it until I came back to Australia. And then NIDA Open needed some assistance to help with their tutors with the programs they run, which I'm sure you know something about, considering that's how we met. And very quickly, even after running a few classes, I started to assisting a few classes. I started to feel like, you know what, maybe I do have something to offer as a teacher in these rooms. And I still was assisting for about a good year or so, throwing in a pandemic as well to extend that period. But I learned a lot from working with some really awesome tutors and seeing how they approach things and the exercises they had. and then when I got bumped up to tutor, I felt quite ready. I received some good support in the room to like help hone my skills, and then kind of just been flying ever since. In terms of my approach, it's like it's a mix of all the stuff I've learned over the years. So I very much care about teaching, particularly when I'm working with kids, teaching them on how to understand how to read a script and how to approach a script. My approach is basically to try and teach, because I'm often working with a lot of beginner actors, to try and teach them all the stuff I wish someone had told me when I was 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, 17 years old, 21 years old. Just even simple things about like given circumstances. I didn't really understand Stanislavski's Given Circumstances until I got to drama school. And even then afterwards, when I was really putting it into practice. So my approach is also trying to find out whatever a student needs. That can be harder when you've got like a group, a really big group of like K to 2s. But sometimes what they need is just the opportunity to get up on the floor and play and engage with their imaginations. And then I also teach, I've just finished 8 weeks of teaching grade 11 and 12s Shakespeare. And in that case, I was teaching them all the stuff I was discussing earlier, which is like how to actually approach these texts so that you can perform them. All the stuff that, because they read it in English, they read it in English class at school, and they have to write essays and stuff, but they don't get a lot of opportunities to actually get it up on the floor and perform it and really discover the muscularity of it. And some of those young actors really take to it very quickly, and I just need to give them a little tweak, or like I present all the material I can, all the techniques, and then I let them go and help them find it. And then sometimes there's another actor who just needs a little nudge, just being like, hey, like I can tell you haven't really investigated this, so you need to put in some more work so that you can actually really engage with this piece. And I got this from even when I've been a student, and like I did a course with the acting coach Larry Moss, who's an American guy who would come over to Australia. And you read his book and he seems like a bit intense, like in that some of the stuff he says to his students can seem pretty upsetting. But then when you hear him actually say it, like in the room, he's doing it with a grin and a twinkle in his eye, and you go, "Oh, okay, he's just having a laugh. It's all good." But if he saw actors get up who he could tell if they've done the work, but he was also very quick to tell them what else they needed to do. So I remember 2 young actors getting up, and he straight away went, "Look, I think you can both have careers as actors. I can tell that because I've been doing this a long time. But you really need to connect with your voices." And so all the exercises he was doing with them was to speak their lines while doing physical actions, so their voice would really ring out in the space. And you know what? He was right, because both those actors have since gone on to do roles on film and TV and stage. But then in contrast, there might be another actor up there who was very good, but he felt hadn't actually put in as much work as they could or was holding back. And he would say to them, like, "You're lazy. You're being lazy." In my case, he said to me, "You're lazy with your circumstances." So he felt I wasn't really embracing my given circumstances, and I've never forgotten that. So that has influenced my approach in the sense that, like, I try and kind of discover what each student needs. And so if I'm working with a beginner, I'm going to be very gentle, very nurturing. I'm not here to psychologically break them down, particularly if it's like a 1-day, 2-day course. I want to give them as much information as I can so that also they're getting their money's worth. And and they can walk away being like, hey, like I might not have like put it all into practice, but I've learned something. And then if I have a student who I might be working with, you know, one-on-one over multiple sessions, and I'll start off very, like I've had clients where I've started off very gentle, and it's not that I get mean or anything, but I just like, I try and let them decide how much they want to get out of it. And I make it very clear that like, this is how I can help you, but you got to put in the work. And when they do, like it shows, like they blossom. So yeah, that's my approach. I also try to, treat the young actors, and young actor I mean like also like beginner actor, in how I wanted to be treated as well.
Amazing. And my final question, Nick, is, this is a question I ask all my guests, is
yes.
What makes you, you? If I saw you walking down the street, I could say, oh, that's Nick. What makes you, you?
Well, I want to say that it's the full breadth of all my life experiences, everything I've done, my childhood, my education, all the travel I've done, the turning points. So going to the high school that I did, getting into NIDA, going on the cruise ship, meeting my partner, traveling to New York, doing CDPs, Snuggle Pot and Cuddle Pie, like all that is what makes up me. But if I'm really honest with myself, it's dinosaurs and dragons. That's me. I'm just a big nerd. I'm just the kid who liked dinosaurs who grew up.
Amazing. Nick, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Thank you so much for sharing all those wonderful stories, all that wonderful experience, all your kindness. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope you can cut it into something palatable for your audience. No, it's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on. I'm really chuffed that you asked me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Ticket podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to share this with your friends and family and subscribe so you can stay up to date with new episodes. Feel free to reach out to hello@pacificvideo.com.au for feedback and suggestions. We would love to hear from you. Take care